We all know what toughness is. You push through the pain, you never relent, you dig in, you bulldoze through the wall. But what if that idea is wrong? What if we get toughness completely backwards? What if it's quieter? What if it's about navigating discomfort instead of endlessly pushing through? In this episode today, you're going to learn why research and the best performers in the world all have a different definition of toughness than the bros on Instagram and Facebook. This is Excellence Actually. I'm Steve Magnus, joined as always by Clay Skipper and Brad Stolberg. Let's get into it.
So, Steve, you had a recent Substack post that had a study that got at some of the myths versus realities when it comes to toughness. So why don't you lay out or unpack what that study showed?
What it did is it looked at Hell Week. So Navy SEALs essentially try out Hell Week's the worst part of it. It's when they do all sorts of crazy stuff to see, do you basically survive or not? And they looked at all of the physical predictors of, your success afterwards. And they looked at everything from, swimming performances to how many push-ups, sit-ups, lifts, weights you lifted, all of these good things. And they found out that the best predictor was essentially how fast did you run 4 miles? If you ran it at faster than I think it was under 24 minutes, which is 6-minute mile pace, there was a 35% success rate. If you only ran it at 26 and under, 25%. And if you only ran it at 28 minutes, only 8% of candidates succeeded. And the point of this is, of course, aerobic fitness, endurance plays a role in handling the demands of their tryouts. But in addition to that, running hard and fast requires this subtle kind of toughness where you're put in a situation where you have to navigate part of your brain screaming at you to essentially stop or slow down or give in. And you can't just push your way through that, because if you push, that voice is going to get louder and eventually your brain's going to go, I'm going to shut you down anyways. You've got to figure out, okay, how do I stay close enough to this pace, to this effort, stay in this race until I get close to the finish line? And in addition to this single study, what we know, if we're looking at military and Hell Week and special forces, is that people who have done some sort of individual sport with a high level of endurance component in it, like rowing or even things like wrestling. I think wrestling is the most played sport out of SEALs. They tend to have better success rates. Okay. And if we took it out of Hell Week to the rest, as we'll do in this podcast, we see the same is when you've gone through something that helps you navigate discomfort, that forces you to go on that battle with the angel and devil on your shoulder, you develop a kind of quieter kind of toughness that actually works versus the old school football coach style that screams at you and tells you that you suck and you have to just figure it out.
So I have a hot take right off the bat here. I think that running and rowing and wrestling, the reason that these sports tend to be the best predictors of who survives Hell Week is they're essentially combining a strong mindfulness practice with something physical. So you think about a mindfulness meditation practice, and you have to sit there with your eyes closed, focusing on your breath or the sensations in your body, some kind of anchor, and you feel all sorts of discomfort. You feel pain, you feel an itch, you feel an urge to check your stopwatch to make sure that the alarm didn't hit pause. You think about what you're going to eat for dinner that night. You have happy thoughts, you have distressing thoughts, and on and on and on. And you just have to come back to the anchor, to your focus, over and over and over again. I don't think that the best mindfulness meditators would make it through Hell Week in isolation, because if all you do is meditate and you don't have any physical skills or capabilities, then you're probably not going to do well in those tests of survival. However, if you take a great meditator who is also physically capable, they're the perfect candidate for Hell Week. And you think about what a 4-mile run at 6 minutes is, well, that's clearly a solid runner. You think about a solid rower or a wrestler who can go round after round in all these sports, you're essentially combining strong physical capacities, whether it's pure aerobic, such as running, or more strength and aerobic, like wrestling. It doesn't really matter, with the ability to be mindful and not to react to every single sensation. And you don't necessarily get that in a sport like football, where you're regrouping every 10 seconds. Football is the equivalent. It's a great sport. I played football in high school. I was good at football, but it's just a different capability. Football is the equivalent of meditating for 10 seconds, then every 10 seconds, like itching your feet or regrouping, and then going and meditating for another 10 seconds and getting a 30-second break. It's just a completely different capacity. So I think that's why running shines. That's why rowing shines. These are like the mindful physical pursuits.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I think what we see here is like contrasting ideas of toughness. Again, I love football, a lot of respect for the sport and those who play it, but the demands of it create a different kind of toughness, which is there's breaks which allow you to take the foot off the gas, to regroup, refocus, and then know that you're going to focus and hurt or try and, knock someone's head off for 5 seconds. And then you do it again. That's a demand. But when we look at, the enduring pain and discomfort, okay, which is often, whether we look at endurance sports or somewhat endurance sports like wrestling, or we look at dealing with stress, pain, discomfort in the real world, it's often of the enduring variety, right? Someone who has to go through a really stressful experience, someone who has a chronic disease or, pain disorder. Like, you have to figure out how to navigate that. And that demands a different kind of quote unquote toughness or mental skill set than saying, for these 5 seconds, I'm going to tolerate whatever comes at me, but then I'm going to like refocus and regroup.
I want to drill down into what we're describing as toughness and maybe pull some of these threads apart, because I'm almost thinking of 3 versions of toughness now. I'm thinking of, you have the sort of classic old school gym teacher football toughness, which is like bash through the other guy, play through pain, shoot up your knee, if you in the locker room at halftime, like Boobie Miles, to stay out there. Then you have the what I guess I would call it the performance runner, right? The person who's running 4 miles at 6-minute pace. And that type of toughness is the toughness of having to deal with physical discomfort, but also like the ability to problem solve and make good decisions and respond rather than react. That's sort of psychological flexibility. But then there's also like the enduring endurance sports athlete who has a sort of different kind of toughness from the performance, like the runner, but also different toughness from the football player, where it's like you have to endure sort of physical pain, but it's a little bit more just like beating you down and having to keep like showing up and handling it, but you're not necessarily making as many sort of solving as many problems or making as many decisions as maybe you are in the 6-minute mile thing.
Let me take your analogy and take it one step further, all in running. Okay.
Great.
One is like running a 400, where it's going to hurt like hell over the last 100 meters, but you don't have to think. You're just like, for the last 100 meters, stare at the finish line, do whatever I can to like push through this and get to the end of this race. The middle one is like running a 5K or 10K, where it starts to build and it's going to start hurting like hell, but you still have to keep your mind on straight and almost have this calmness to be like, okay, am I on pace? Do I respond to this move or these tactics or not? Like, how do I navigate this race? You have to think during it. And then the last one is like running a 100-miler, right? Where the pain doesn't come from the intensity of the thing itself. It comes from, oh dear God, I'm at 40 miles into this 100-mile. I still have 60 miles left to go. And I'm not going for a walk. It's still hard enough where it's like, this kind of sucks, but it's this long, almost like uncertainty grinding effect that the strategy is almost like, how do I figure out how to function in my basic needs to take fuel, eat some more stuff, remember to hydrate, don't do anything crazy to get through this ultra marathon versus the other 2 events.
So I have a question for you then, Steve, because in your book, Do Hard Things, which if people have not read it and are interested in learning more about toughness and reading one of the best books on toughness there is out there, I would encourage them to go buy a copy and read it. But in that book, you anchor it the beginning of it, at least if I remember correctly, about how you used to always puke at the end of your runs, right? And at some point, you ended up giving yourself like a physical condition. Obviously, the physical condition held you back, but do you think there was something about like running until you puke that could have been useful? Like, is there anything in there that would have been useful from a toughness standpoint?
I mean, I think it's incredibly useful because it's just tolerating pain, right? And there is use for that. That's the key. And what I would say here is for me and for most people, I think, maybe this is changing now, hopefully because they read my book. But for most people, the immature or the early version of toughness, especially if you learn it through sport, is just go till you puke. Because it's the easiest one to conceptualize. And I think it's the easiest one to train, right? Because everything else requires you to essentially go be like, okay, listen, little Johnny, we're going to learn about mindfulness today. And that's not as sexy as saying like, hey, on this 400-meter repeats, like just keep pushing until you're done, And I think that's what we have to get around is like one comes naturally and the other is like, okay, we've got to consciously develop these tools and skill sets so that we can call upon them when we need them.
I do think that it's valuable to develop the go until you puke, as Steve said, and maybe you even almost have to do that first. So yeah, little Johnny, you can go until you puke. You can tolerate discomfort and pain. And now we're going to teach you that you don't always have to go until you puke. And actually, sometimes it's counterproductive to go until you puke. But I do think that there's value in first showing someone what they're capable of tolerating, because you gain a lot of confidence and self-reliance. It's like, oh, if I can get through that, then I can get through anything. And then phase two is, well, you don't always need to get through that, and it's not always the right tool. And instead of glorifying going until you puke or white knuckling it as toughness, we can say that going until you puke or white knuckling it is a tool in the toughness toolkit. Slowing down is a tool in the toughness toolkit. And it's all about what are the demands of the event that you're in and what is the right decision under distress. If you go until you puke in a quarterfinal or a semifinal and you burn your match and then you are flat in the final, that's not tough. That's idiotic. If you go until you puke in the final and you win a gold medal, that's really tough and you're a hero. Same tool, just used in the wrong application versus the right application. And these are metaphors from sport, but this is true in just about everything.
And I think that right here, we've been dancing around it, but all the examples lay that out. And if I was to contrast, like we'll call it Instagram bro toughness versus reality, what you see here is we're saying step one, identify the demands that you're stepping into, right? Are you running the 100, the mile, the 10K, the ultra marathon? All of those will require different skill sets, and that applies to life as well. Are you going through something that you know is going to last a couple hours or that could potentially change your life for the rest of your life, right? Is you need to know the demands that you're facing. And then I think what differs from the old school version is we used to just give everyone a hammer and say, here you go, Johnny, like go beat your head against the wall, run till you'll puke, or in outside of athletic endeavors, just suffer in silence, be stoic, don't show any emotions. Like you're a man in the old school language, right? And what we know is that there are times when that hammer is going to be useful. But there are also times when we're going to need a screwdriver, a saw, a wrench, or whatever have you. And the tough people, tough individuals have a wide array of toolkit and the flexibility to use them given what they're seeing in front of them.
So let's get into how people should use what we're talking about, how they can apply this in their own life. What are some tools they can try to put into practice or ways of deliberately practicing so that they can build all these different type of toughnesses that we are describing here?
I think the simplest and most impactful in our current time is just practice sitting with something uncomfortable. And we can frame it as mindfulness. You can look at meditation, but literally, all I want you to do is think of things where something is pulling you away, pulling you towards something else, and you just have to sit with it. It could be as simple as having our phone in front of us and you just being like, no, I'm gonna just sit here and my phone's gonna be there and my brain is gonna be like, check the notification, Steve. Clay might have texted you something funny. Like, don't you wanna see that? Brad might have sent you a lifting video. Don't you want to make fun of him? Like, that's what your brain is doing. And you've got to be able to just sit with it and be like, no, I'm gonna breathe through this. I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna go on a walk without my phone and just be alone in my thoughts. The more things that we can do where we're just learning how to be in our head and sit with it instead of pulling towards some sort of quick solution, the better off our toughness muscle will be.
Even upstream of that is getting really clear on what's the objective for a given task or activity. And is the objective to feel discomfort and endure it? Or is the objective performance? And those are two very different things. And if the objective is performance, then toughness is making a decision that aligns with that value of performing your best. And is it performing your best today? Or is it performing the best over the course of a training cycle or over the course of a year? And that also is going to change the decision. And I think so often we go into things and we think it's got to hurt. It's got to hurt right now or I'm doing it wrong. And if the goal is to just make yourself hurt, then sure, make it hurt. And then you win the day. But if the goal is some kind of performance improvement or adaptation or skill that you're developing, then true toughness is doing what you can to set yourself up for that performance. And in so many athletic contexts, you really don't want to make it hurt until like the day that you're racing or competing. And even then, you don't want to make it hurt too early. You want to make it hurt at the end, if you're going to make it hurt at all. So I think that it's just so important to get clear on like, what is the objective of what I'm working on? And how can I set myself up best to meet that objective? And then toughness is downstream of that. I think something that is so simple and you can start doing today, but is really profound, is just asking yourself, what is the purpose of this? What's the purpose of this workout? What's the purpose of this class at school? What's the purpose of this conversation with my romantic partner? What's the purpose of this youth baseball league for my 8-year-old? And the purpose is probably for your 8-year-old to have a good experience playing sports. So then the tough thing isn't to yell at your 8-year-old and push him or her to the brink. The tough thing is to sit there and say nothing and just let them be kids. That's the tough thing to do in that situation. Why? Because the purpose is for them to want to play next year. So often we just go on autopilot into things when we should always ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this? And then from there, it becomes really clear on what the tough act is or isn't.
These are things that are easy to talk about and very hard to do. And I think one of the problems with toughness is that some of our reactive patterns are so automatic that we don't even notice that we're quelling our discomfort. And so I even think a useful exercise, even before exposing yourself to the discomfort that Steve was talking about, which I totally agree with, and is something I try to practice in like very small doses, even as trivial as like, I'm waiting for the elevator. Let me pull out my phone and being like, let me not do that. But before I'm able to even do that, I have to be able to recognize that voice that is saying like, oh, I'm bored or I need a little stimulation or whatever. So even just like bringing a little bit of awareness into that internal monologue, because I think so often it happens just like so automatically that we don't even have the sort of the space between stimulus and response doesn't exist, right? And we have to figure out a way to cultivate awareness such that we can bring space into that so that we can respond rather than react. So even if for just the next week, you're just noticing moments where you're noticing your patterns of like, oh, every time I'm in line at the grocery store, I pull out my phone, or every time I go to do a workout and maybe I've had an injury in the past and I feel a little discomfort in my foot, like I slow down, I freak out. Just beginning to like understand and befriend the voice in your head will help you cultivate other responses to it.
I think that's spot on, Clay. And I think what that does is it not only creates space between stimulus and response, but it allows you to essentially change the direction of the response. Because often what happens is you notice something and then you realize, oh, like, I don't have to go in the direction that this voice wants me to go or that this feeling wants me to go. I can go in a different voice. And one of the tools that I think really helps here is you start to notice these patterns and you can start to label them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is you can start to say, that's like crazy quitting Steve that always shows up during like the fourth rep of the workout. Like, hey, good to see you. I expected you. Sometimes it's like, oh, you're here a little early, or thanks for being a rep or two late. But like you name it and label it so that you can then deal with it instead of seeing it as like, oh no, there's that evil voice that showed up. And that means like I'm done for. So I think it's almost like you've got to be able to become a friend to your inner world. And whether that's the voices in your head, the emotions or feelings you're experiencing, if we treat them like an enemy, guess what? Our brain's going to be like, oh, the enemy has showed up, go to war. If we treat them like a friend, then we get to say, that's that kind of weirdo who keeps showing up in my dorm room, and I'm going to be nice so that I can get rid of him really quickly versus, trying to shoo him away and then he's going to go all psycho on me. Like that's how you handle things. And I think the old school toughness often told us to, like, just shut them all out and go to war. But like the nuance is there to help us handle it.
I think another tool is taking something that is often used in athletic context and bringing it to all of life, which is this notion of RPE, which stands for rate of perceived exertion. And oftentimes a coach will assign a workout or even just a rep in a workout and say, I want the RPE to be 8 out of 10, or 7 out of 10. And there's all kinds of research that shows that actually better than heart rate or power, doing workouts based on RPE tends to lead to the best performance. Now, you need to be somewhat skilled to understand the difference between a 2 and a 10 to get here. Take that RPE model to the rest of your life. So not everything can be an RPE 10, because if it is, you're going to be toast. So true toughness is not making everything an RPE 10. True toughness is knowing what should the RPE be of this block of deep work? What should the RPE be of this difficult conversation I'm having? What should the RPE be of preparing these PowerPoint slides for the meeting? And try to stick the RPE. And for some people that pull up too short, that's going to mean pushing through and working a little bit harder than is comfortable. For people who are perfectionist or who always overwork themselves, the tough thing to do is going to be holding back. But not everything can be an RPE 10, because if everything's an RPE 10, then nothing's an RPE 10. On the days that you do identify, or the weeks or the months, this is an RPE 10, then absolutely go to the well, channel your inner David Goggins. But the problem is, if every morning you're waking up and David Goggins is yelling at you, well, then everything's a 10 and nothing's a 10, and you end up an unserious person.
One of the things that I think you said there, Brad, that is really important is like, we've got to train that ability to go in the other direction. And often what we do is when we're in sport or life, we go towards the thing that we're comfortable with. This is why if you've only bulldozed ahead and pushed through, you always go towards pushing through. In a running context, this is why I would often tell athletes, we had these ideas of there's certain workouts where we want you to try something different, right? And if you blow up because of it, that's okay. No big deal. But whatever your normal strategy is, like, go in the opposite direction so that you can at least have that as an option in the future if you need to. So for example, we'll take it outside of the sporting context, but if you get in arguments with your significant other or your wife, often what happens is like you start like narrowing and going towards the other person, right? Practice stepping back in those moments. How do we create space? How do we move this argument to another room? How do we take time out? How do we zoom out and get out of this argument? If you always go at each other, like, think of how do I develop that opposite tool? Or on the opposite end, if you're one of those who just push till you puke, how do you give yourself permission to pause or even quit that rep and see what it feels like and understand, okay, was this the right decision? But we've got to open up those pathways and train them so that they become real possibilities versus just defaulting towards like whatever is our comfort zone when we're actually in the thick of it in the arena.
We just gave you a big bucket of tools that you can use to begin to build this type of toughness, this varied, dynamic, flexible type of toughness into your own life. If you found a tool in there useful, if you heard a tool in there and you thought, man, my friend Bob or my coworker Susie or my cousin Jim needs to use that tool in their life or could be helped by using that tool in their life, please take a second, send it to them right now. It's the best way to support us and grow this podcast, which we're really trying to do. So take a minute, do it. Thank you so much. Back to the show.
I think that what happens currently in the culture, and I'm painting in broad strokes, but I think that there's a lot of truth to the colors here, is that there's a group of unserious people that say toughness is all about going till you puke and that you're a sissy man if you're skinny and all this nonsense. And then there's a group of other wholly unserious people that say that you should never go until you puke and that everything that is hard is trauma. And I think that both those groups are very unserious. And the serious people are sitting there being like, actually, all you people, pounding your chest like you're in Planet of the Apes are morons. But all you people who are scared of discomfort and are trying to live in a bubble and protect yourself and your kids from any discomfort are also like not very enlightened, not nearly as enlightened as y'all think you are. And the serious people in the middle know that there's a time and a place to thump your chest like a gorilla, and there's a time and a place to pull back. And anyone who has performed at a high level at anything knows this, whether it's sport, whether it's surgery, whether it's performing arts, it does not matter. You learn this. But unfortunately, we live in a world where clowns suck up most of the air. And that's why you get these morons yelling at each other on the internet.
But why do you think, I mean, this is going to maybe take us too philosophical and to a social cultural context, but I don't think those people see themselves as unserious. I think they're very serious. They're
idiots. They're dumb. I'm happy to say it. They're dumb.
Yeah, but that's a lot of people who are getting this wrong. Is this just
Yeah.
us being elitist again?
We're elitists, okay? But no, here.
But if you listen to this podcast, then I guess, listen, either you're done listening to us forever and we just lost you, or hopefully we're saying, like, you're not alone. If you're looking out at this and being like, we're living in a freaking clown show, the person behind the simulation is drunk, and toughness is just one example where this comes out, well, you're in good company at the growth equation because we feel this way too.
So I think let's break this apart because I think this is really important. Okay. I think that the thumping of your chest comes from insecurity. Okay. It's projection. It's how do I make myself appear like I'm tough? Because that really matters to me. So it's the chest thumping on Instagram. It's the declaring, you're the toughest person in the world. It's based on not doing anything. It's being outside of the arena and challenging yourself. I think on the other side of the coin, I think it's almost like hard things are hard. And it's uncomfortable to navigate difficult things in difficult moments. And this is true of physical pursuits. It's hard to go out and run every day, regardless of whether you're running 8-minute miles or 5-minute miles. It's hard. It's also hard to have difficult conversations on subjects that you don't want to talk about. So it's comforting to be able to step back and be like, nah, kumbaya. Like, don't have to do anything hard. Like, don't go till you puke. Don't do any of this stuff. Like, I'm going to sit in the comfort of my living room on my couch and tweet at people or whatever it is that you're doing. And I get it. We're painting with broad brushes here. But I think both of these extremes are just coping mechanisms for people who don't want to confront the messy middle. Because to use the race example, if I go into a race and I say, hey, I'm going to run this 5K, I'm exposed. I have to figure out, and I'm going to hit a point where part of my brain, even if I'm the best in the world, part of my brain is screaming at me that I'm not good enough, that I need to slow down, that like I just need to give in. And sometimes I'm going to listen to that voice. Maybe not all the way, but sometimes I'm going to listen to that voice. And I'm going to finish that race, and I'm going to finish 5th instead of 1st and be like, oh, if I only would have figured this out, I would have won. And you have to confront yourself because you're exposed to understand, you know what? I'm not a superhuman. In the easiest way, and I know I'm talking about running, but the same thing applies in life, right? You have to confront yourself on the decisions you make at work, in life, who you vote for, all of these things. And you have to come to terms with the messiness of not living in a black and white world. So it's much easier to either live in either delusion of saying, I'm just going to go until I puke, and that's my toughness, bravado, or I'm just going to step out and live in fantasy land where we never have to do anything hard. And like trying to is just dumb. And it's just hard to be in the middle.
It's making me think of a past guest we've had on the podcast, also a friend of mine and big time listener of the show, but Clayne Conahan, who ran Badwater 135. When you were saying, hard things are hard, and she said one of her favorite things about doing Badwater is, she's done it twice now, but it's just like knowing you're gonna eat shit, and like that's the reason you sign up for it, right? Is like you are partially training so that you can eat shit and learn that you can do something hard. But she also combines it with ultra running is like in so many ways is about problem solving, right? So it's flexing both of those muscles of like learning that you are capable of eating shit and you are tough, but also learning how to navigate problems with grace, with responding thoughtfully rather than reacting emotionally while you're eating shit, right? And so I think that was an interesting distillation.
And that's it, Clay. And that's it in nearly all of life. It's not just sport. I mean, think about it. Is if you work at a school, my teachers, my educators, like whether it's a kid or a parent, the easiest thing in the world is to just dismiss a problem student or parent and be like, no, like you're just not smart enough, or you're just a crazy parent and I don't want to deal with you, so I'm going to dismiss it. The hard thing to do is sit back and be like, okay, this kid might annoy me to death. He keeps getting in trouble. But I'm his teacher, and I need to figure out what the problem is, on why he can't learn to read or sit down and do math, right? And I've got to try these different tricks up my sleeves to figure out how can I help this kid, because I've got a year to help him, and it'll make a difference for the rest of your life. That's hard. It's a lot easier to just blow it off and dismiss and be like, no, this kid is XYZ. And the same goes for parents. The same goes for politics. The same goes for, talking about any controversial thing that you could talk about. The easy decision is to be that old school football coach and say, you know what? I can't figure out why this kid, didn't complete his route in the 4th quarter on the final drive. So I'm just going to make him do burpees all day until he pukes. The hard thing is to be like, okay, why was that kid mentally and physically fatigued? What is the factor? How do we train them up? How do we coach them up? How do we change their cues to be able to get the most out of them? How do we change their motivation? That takes time and effort. That's hard. And I think at the core of this conversation we're having right now is that, especially in a world where we can essentially eat candy or go on, scroll on social media and find whatever we want to make us feel good. Like, it's really hard to just sit with the discomfort and figure out, okay, how do I problem solve in this moment, knowing it's going to suck?
Yeah, it makes me think of one of these sort of binaries that I find helpful in sort of like a shorthand, and something we talk about a lot, which is just like choosing curiosity over certainty. Like what you're talking about, Steve, where someone just gives up on a kid because he's weak or whatever, it's just like intellectually lazy, right? And that's because curiosity is like, probably on a biological level, it's metabolically taxing, right? You have to expend more energy to be curious than you do to be certain and just dismiss someone. But I think we've talked a lot in this podcast about like approaching things with a curious orientation rather than a orientation of certainty. Just leads you to a lot more expansive and interesting and constructive places.
All right, I'm going to bring us back down to reality after our discussion on society and toughness. That is a big issue, but it's one that we can easily get overwhelmed with. And what I want everyone listening to understand is that you don't have to tackle society's craziness. We can acknowledge it, but there are simple things that we can all do, whether it's with ourselves to handle difficult problems in our lives or to navigate difficult relationships or become better at performance or sport, or to help teach our children, kids, students, others a version of toughness that gives them a myriad of tools instead of just saying, here's a hammer, good luck surviving at life. Like, we are all responsible for creating, I think, a robust toughness versus the either extremes of the Instagramified toughness that we often see in society. So with that, we hope you're with us. Let's sum it up to give you some takeaways to bring home to your life and those around you.
Yeah, if you want to begin practicing building some of these toughness tools that we talked about today, we'll sum up again here quickly. One is just asking yourself, what is the objective of whatever I'm about to do? And knowing what you want to get out of it, because that can calibrate what type of toughness you might need to exhibit. If it's something where you need to push and endure some difficulty and discomfort, then you can do that. But if it's a situation where maybe you do that all the time, or that will cause further harm or long-term ability to do the thing, then you might want to be a little softer, a little bit more gracious and forgiving. We talked about exposing yourself intentionally to small bouts of discomfort so you can build your discomfort muscle. And we also talked about training that awareness muscle or function or strength by just noticing what it sounds like in your head when you're having that pull of trying to avoid discomfort, whether that's in a workout or in a difficult conversation or even just navigating boredom or impatience, anything like that. So those are things you can put into your life right away. If you enjoyed this podcast, you found something in here helpful, please send it to a family member, a friend, a coworker, a colleague, anyone you think will benefit from it. We appreciate you being in this community and we want to grow it. And that's the best way to support our work. Thank you, as always, for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode. And until then, as always, be excellent to each other.